Hi there, my name is Susan and I'll be walking you through a demonstration of my 20-minute daily portrait drawing. I'll be sharing with you how I sketch and how I shade my portraits. I have been drawing these daily 20-minute sketches for 2 years now, and it has really helped me improve my sketching skills and my understanding of facial anatomy. I find my reference photos mostly through Pinterest, but also from various other ads that I see on websites that sell jewelry or other accessories. I draw and share my progress every day on YouTube, and I would often get comments relating to what I use. As you can see, I basically just use a mechanical pencil with colored lead. The colored lead is erasable and quite soft, so if you pressure too much on these, they will break. But a good thing about their softness is that they can be blended. I have 2 erasers that I grab often, a retractable precision eraser, and the one I'm using is from Tombow right now, but these can be found from any art supply stores. And the other eraser that I absolutely can't live without, that I've been using since I was a little girl, when I first introduced to sketching, is a knead eraser. It can be used in so many different ways, and I would say if there's a single eraser that you want to get, and if there's a single eraser that you're doing pencil sketching with, then this knead eraser would be a go-to eraser. If you want to follow along this demonstration, you can use anything you want. You don't need to have a fancy mechanical pencil. In fact, you don't even need a mechanical pencil. Any pencil will do. Graphite by default is blendable, which makes it such a wonderful medium to use for sketching. For all of my sketches, I just begin with a very rough sketch of the reference photo. There are many methods that you can use. Some are very systematic, such as the Loomis method. I am not using that. I think my method is more derived from figure drawing technique, where I use very loose lines to define the prominent lines that I see. I try to identify shapes of facial features, as well as shapes of shadow or negative spaces. Most of the time, when I pick out a reference photo, there's something that I really like to draw from the reference photo. What I find that I tend to gravitate towards right after defining loosely the boundaries and prominent shapes would be what I find intriguing and most interesting to draw from the reference photo. That would be my suggestion for anyone who wants to pick up drawing as well. Draw what you find interesting. Pick a subject matter that you're well versed in and dig into it to find a bunch of drawings that you like. You don't have to use Pinterest, but it is a tool that's pretty easy to use to get started. Once you have a bunch of inspirations about the subject matter, type of drawing style or medium you want to use, you can pick a few that are simple in nature. What I mean by that is look for clear lines, clear value transitions, single light source, simple composition, etc., etc. Those will be your starting point. So in this case, you can tell that I started to focus on her eyes. I find that she has a really interesting gaze in a kind of cheeky way. It's almost like her eyes are smiling at you. I also like how round her nose is, and the shadow on her nose and her cheeks are quite interesting to depict as well. During this time, I also go back to my initial sketches and assess their accurateness. I would measure in my head the spaces between facial features to see if they are accurate. I will redraw them in this step if my initial lines weren't accurate. For example, her hair strand position was clearly off, so I just redrew them with slightly heavier lines. I can use a knead eraser to remove the lighter sketch lines in the end. So this sketch is often when I let myself loose and lost track of time, because all I can think of is the reference photo and capturing it in my sketchbook. It's a weird feeling to describe, but basically my mind will wander off to some other place. I would forget about my troubles and anxiety. I would no longer feel like I'm in a rush to do anything. All I want to do is to make sure I've captured this reference photo. It's a similar feeling when I'm reading a really interesting novel I would just get lost in the plot of the novel and forget what time it was, what I was doing before, and what I need to do after. When I'm really anxious or feeling troubled, I resort to drawing and reading. They really help with my depression and anxiety. If you know me in real life, you probably wouldn't even think I'm sometimes troubled by these issues. I would appear as if I got it all together and I have everything figured out. But it's not like that. I think everyone has their own story and their own struggles. You might not be able to relate to their struggles in life, but that doesn't make their struggles go away. They exist and they're troubled by these things. And they need to live with them and figure out a way to cope with them. We're all just trying our best. So here you can see that I've started to really get into sketching out all the features and redefining them with clearer lines and clearer boundaries. When I shade, I like to use a group of evenly distributed hatching lines. I don't always go with contours of the shapes, I leave that to the end. The initial sketching lines are really rough and they're there to define the values. What I'm focusing on are to define the lightest versus the darkest areas, as well as the midtones and how they transition from one to the other on various terrains. I'm also not focusing too much on edges. Sharp edges would depict a strong contrast, and I'm not too worried about those right now. Those are details that can be created using erasers later on. I recently started to use a blending stump. I've actually always used my finger to create smoother gradations before and never bothered with using a blending stump, even though I've seen others use it frequently. The reason I picked one up is because I just wanted to try something new. After using it, I would say there's nothing that this can do that your finger cannot. It is cleaner, but I still find that I would get my hands dirty anyway. So in terms of cleanup, it's not like it saved me the trouble to wash my hands afterwards. The only benefit that I see is that it is smaller than my fingertip, so I can make more precision blending with this tool. They are also quite affordable because they're just densely rolled up paper. You can always obviously DIY it yourself, but I think it's not really worth the trouble because of how cheap they can be bought from art supply stores. If you're new to shading, the general rule of thumb is to build up your lines gradually. You don't have to apply even pressure nor good-looking lines. Just make sure you are applying pressure to your lines lightly over and over. Then gradually you can build up your confidence with your shading. I don't recommend going in with strong and harsh lines when it comes to shading. Although sometimes I do rush through things and start to use harsher and stronger lines midway through my drawing sessions, I'm sure you've seen those packs of pencil sets ranging from 8H to 8B. Those pencil sets are basically for beginners to sketch where you might not be able to control your shading pressure that well yet. I've probably purchased a dozen of those pencil sets by now, but I've never ever finished using them. The ones that I always grab are 6B, 2B, and 2H. I tend to skip through all the rest. When using the blending stump, I would go from dark to light, never from light to dark. If I'm just trying to create an even surface, then I would go back and forth on a single area. But otherwise, if I'm trying to create a smooth gradation, then always dark to light. I think one of the things that sets my sketches apart from others is actually the fact that I don't create evenly close together hatching lines. When I was little and started learning sketching from my art teacher, he would always tell me to make hatching evenly close together. I would have take-home assignments where all I do is sketching groups of lines. I hated it. I think there's just something so incredibly boring about a flat shaded surface created by using evenly pressure and close together lines. So boring looking. I think because of that negative sentiment, now that I can draw whatever I want, however I want, I never create evenly closed lines. I know that makes my drawing slightly messy looking and highly texturized, but I prefer it that way. To me, art style is basically your own preferences and your own habits all lumped together. And whether I like it or not, my habit defines the outcome for me. After I've defined the transitions using a blending tool, I go back in to add textures with more groupings of hatchings. During this stage, my focus is to finish the drawing, because typically, I would not have much time left if my aim is to finish this drawing within 20 minutes. If I end up prolonging this drawing, it's usually because I dwelled on details during this stage. If I find some obvious mistakes, I have learned to just let them go. If I'm already at this stage of the drawing, it is too late. I would tell myself it's too late and that I need to just draw a new one next time. So the things that I would do during this stage to finish the drawing are: number 1, darkening the darkest areas, lightening up the lightest areas, create cleaner boundaries by redrawing edges or smoothing outlines that are a bit too clear right now and not at all convincing in real life. There's often something that I want to achieve in my head during this stage to just really make sure that I've captured that essence. I know I don't have enough time to focus on everything. There are details and features that I've noticed during this stage that I just don't have enough time to draw them out. So during this stage, it's also a battle within my head to figure out what's necessary to capture and what I should prioritize my time to detail them out, whether something is worth it or not, and I should just let them go. So now I would say a general rule of thumb is to focus on the midsection of your drawing. This doesn't just apply to portraits or even sketches. It's applicable for everything. If there's something meaningful or representational that you want to capture, and you don't want the focus from the viewer to be everywhere, then you pick the midsection. There are many methods to adding details and making sure that viewer will focus on that one area. The simplest is just to add more detail, add more things, have the midsection to be the most complex and most interesting to look at. In my drawing, I basically blended out the tip of her hair and her neck region. There just isn't enough details and they are quite vague to our eyes. Even though they are vague, there are just enough subtle lines to suggest what they are, and that's basically all we need. I have more shading and stronger, more precise, and more definitive lines around her midsection. These lines draw the viewer in, and that's what most people would notice and see when they are presented with this drawing. In order to improve your drawing, it's important to reflect on your own progress. When I examine this drawing, I can notice imperfections and things that I still want to do to make it better. There are areas in her hair that I want to darken even more, as well as the right side of her face. I would have hoped that the shadow is a bit more prominently depicted. I would want to make her eyebrow a bit more defined compared to a bit blurred in my drawing. Same as the shadows around her eyes, they can be cleaned up quite a bit more for my liking. Overall, I do think I capture her cheekiness. I think my drawing made her look a little bit younger, but overall, you can still see the resemblance. I like the final drawing, and I might draw her again sometime in the future.